The January frost had transformed London into a city of ice and bitter wind when the Royal Mail Inspector, Mr. Geoffrey Hartwell, arrived at Baker Street, accompanied by a postal worker whose hands trembled uncontrollably despite the warmth of our sitting room. Carrying a sealed metal box containing what appeared to be ordinary letters, but which had already claimed 3 lives in the most mysterious and untraceable manner, bringing with them a mystery that would prove to be one of the most scientifically complex and methodically sinister cases Sherlock Holmes ever investigated. Holmes, who had been researching various forms of poison delivery systems and the emerging science of toxicology as part of his studies into methods of untraceable murder, work that would prove devastatingly relevant to our investigation, looked up with immediate alarm as our visitors entered, noting the fear in the postal worker's eyes and the extreme caution with which Hartwell handled the sealed container. Mr. Hartwell was perhaps 55 years old, bearing the official gravity of someone responsible for the vast machinery of the postal system, while the younger man beside him, whom he introduced as postal carrier Daniel Morrison, appeared to be suffering from profound shock and guilt over deaths he had unwittingly facilitated through the simple act of delivering mail. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Hartwell began with urgent formality, "I come to you with a matter of extreme gravity that threatens both public safety and the integrity of the Royal Mail system. Over the past 6 weeks, 3 prominent London residents have died suddenly and mysteriously within hours of receiving letters delivered through the regular post. The deaths initially appeared unconnected, different victims, different circumstances, different apparent causes. But our postal system's internal tracking revealed a disturbing pattern. All 3 victims received letters on the days they died. All 3 letters were posted from the same district postal box in Whitechapel, and all 3 were handled by the same postal carrier, Mr. Morrison, here. The coincidence was too striking to ignore, particularly when doctors examining the victims found symptoms consistent with poisoning, despite no evidence of poison being consumed. I believe someone has discovered a method of delivering lethal poison through the mail itself, somehow making ordinary letters into instruments of death. Mr. Morrison is terrified he's unwittingly participated in murder, and I fear more poisoned letters may be in circulation, waiting to kill whoever opens them. Before I continue with this most deadly case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the terrifying mystery of the letterbox that delivered death. Holmes rose. Immediately, his expression grave with the realization that we were dealing with an exceptionally dangerous and innovative criminal. "Mr. Hartwell, you've brought examples of these suspected poisoned letters. And you've handled them how? With what precautions?" "I've kept them sealed in this metal container since we identified the pattern," Hartwell explained, carefully placing the box on Holmes's table. "No one has opened them or handled them directly since they were recovered from the mail sorting facility. I don't know if they're still dangerous or if the poison, assuming there is poison, remains active, but I'm taking no chances with my staff's lives." "The wise precaution," Holmes said, studying the sealed container without touching it. "Dr. Watson, before we proceed further, I need you to prepare medical supplies for treating potential poison exposure. Activated charcoal, emetics, stimulants, and whatever else your medical judgment suggests might be needed. Mr. Hardwell, tell me everything you know about the 3 deaths, the victims, and the letters they received. Hartwell withdrew a folder containing reports on each death, handing it to Holmes with evident relief at having professional help with this nightmare situation. The first death occurred 6 weeks ago. Lord Edmund Pemberton, a wealthy industrialist and member of the House of Lords, aged 62. He received morning post at his London townhouse around 9 o'clock. By 11 o'clock, his butler found him collapsed in his study, gasping for breath and showing signs of severe distress. The family physician was summoned, but Lord Pemberton died before the doctor arrived. The death was attributed to sudden heart failure, though the physician noted unusual symptoms: excessive salivation, constricted pupils, difficulty breathing, that seemed inconsistent with simple cardiac arrest. The second death occurred 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Sarah Blackwood, a prominent philanthropist and art collector, aged 55. She received her morning post around 10 o'clock while having breakfast. Her maid found her 30 minutes later collapsed at the breakfast table, exhibiting similar symptoms to Lord Pemberton: respiratory distress, excessive salivation, tremors. Mrs. Blackwood died within an hour, despite medical attention. The doctor suspected poisoning, but could identify no source. She hadn't eaten or drunk anything unusual that morning, except her regular tea, which was prepared from the family's supply and consumed by household staff without ill effect. The third death occurred just 5 days ago. Mr. Thomas Whitmore, a banker and financial advisor, age 58. He received morning post at his office around 9:30. By 10 o'clock, his secretary found him in distress, exhibiting the same symptoms as the previous victims. He died before medical help could save him. By this third death, with such similar presentations, the attending physician suspected poisoning strongly enough to report it to the police, which triggered our Postal Service's internal investigation that revealed the pattern. All 3 victims received letters on the morning they died, Hartwell continued. All 3 letters were posted from the same Whitechapel letterbox on the evenings before the victims' deaths. All 3 were handled by Mr. Morrison during his regular delivery route. The letters themselves appeared completely ordinary: standard envelopes, proper addresses, normal postage stamps. Nothing about their external appearance suggested anything dangerous. But the timing and the victim's symptoms suggest that somehow, opening and handling these letters exposed them to a lethal poison that killed within an hour or 2. Holmes examined the reports carefully, his analytical mind clearly working through the medical evidence and the poisoning mechanism. The symptoms you describe, respiratory distress, excessive salivation, constricted pupils, tremors, are consistent with certain types of nerve agent poisoning, particularly organophosphate compounds or certain plant-derived toxins. But traditional poison delivery requires the victim to ingest, inhale, or absorb the toxin through skin contact. How could a letter deliver poison in a way that would be fatal within an hour? That's exactly what we need you to determine, Hartwell said. If we're dealing with poison letters being sent through the mail, the implications are catastrophic. The postal system handles millions of pieces of mail daily. If someone has developed a method of weaponizing ordinary letters, no one would be safe. Anyone could become a victim simply by opening their morning post. We must identify how this is being done, who is doing it, and stop them before more people die. Daniel Morrison, the postal carrier, spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse with guilt and fear. "I delivered those letters, Mr. Holmes. I carried them in my bag. I walked them to those people's homes. I placed them through their letterboxes with my own hands. I killed them, not intentionally, but I was the instrument of their deaths. How can I continue delivering mail, knowing that any letter I carry might be poisoned, might kill whoever receives it? How can anyone trust the post again if letters can be weapons? You are not responsible for these deaths, Mr. Morrison," Holmes said firmly. "You performed your duties exactly as they should be performed. The responsibility lies entirely with whoever created these poisoned letters and sent them through the mail intending murder." But Mr. Morrison's distress highlights the broader problem. If public confidence in the postal system is destroyed, it would cripple communication and commerce throughout Britain. We must solve this case quickly and demonstrate that the postal system remains safe. Holmes approached the sealed metal container with extreme caution, examining it through the metal without opening it. Before we open this container and examine the suspected poison letters, we need to establish proper precautions. Dr. Watson, I need you present with medical supplies ready. Mr. Hartwell and Mr. Morrison should leave the room. There's no reason to expose more people to potential danger than absolutely necessary. I'll examine the letters under controlled conditions, taking samples for chemical analysis and determining the delivery mechanism for the poison. Hartwell and Morrison departed reluctantly, clearly relieved to be away from potential poison, but also anxious about what Holmes might discover. Once they had gone, Holmes and I prepared the room for examining potentially lethal materials. Holmes opened windows to ensure ventilation, positioned his chemical analysis equipment within easy reach, and donned gloves and a makeshift face covering fashioned from cloth to minimize any risk of inhaling toxic particles. "Watson, position yourself near the door with medical supplies ready," Holmes instructed. "If I show any signs of poisoning, difficulty breathing, excessive salivation, tremors, anything resembling the victim's symptoms, you must immediately administer treatment and get me to hospital. Do not attempt to handle the letters yourself if I become incapacitated. Simply seal the container and call for police and medical assistance." With these grim precautions in place, Holmes carefully opened the metal container. Inside were 3 letters, each in a separate sealed evidence envelope, labelled with the victim's name and date of death. Holmes removed the first, addressed to Lord Pemberton, and examined the external envelope carefully through the evidence bag's transparent material. "The envelope appears completely ordinary," Holmes observed. "Standard paper, standard adhesive, postage stamp properly affixed, handwritten address in common script. No visible powder, no unusual discoloration, no obvious signs of tampering. The poison, if that's what killed the victims, must be incorporated into the letter in a way that's not immediately visible." Holmes carefully removed the envelope from its evidence bag, handling it only by the corners with tweezers, and positioned it under a magnifying glass in bright light. He studied every millimeter of the paper surface, looking for any trace of applied substance, any unusual texture, any indication of how poison might have been introduced. "There's something unusual about the paper," Holmes said after several minutes of intense examination. "Look here, Watson. The paper has a very slight, oily sheen, as if it's been treated with some substance that's not part of normal paper manufacturing. And there's a faint chemical odor, barely detectable, somewhat bitter and slightly acrid. He carefully opened the envelope using tweezers, avoiding any direct contact with the interior surfaces. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper with a handwritten message. Holmes unfolded it with extreme caution and read the contents aloud. Lord Pemberton, you are being judged for crimes you believe forgotten. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Your sins have found you out. A vague, threatening message, Holmes observed, but interesting that it acknowledges the poisoning. Your sins have found you out, suggesting the sender views the murder as righteous judgment rather than simple crime. Now, let's examine how the poison was delivered. Holmes tested the paper with various chemical reagents, carefully applying tiny amounts of testing solutions to corner samples and observing the reactions. After extensive testing, he made a disturbing discovery. The paper has been treated with a contact poison, Holmes explained, his voice tight with controlled alarm. Specifically, what appears to be an organophosphate compound incorporated directly into the paper during its manufacture or applied to the surface in a way that makes it nearly invisible. When the victim opened the envelope and handled the letter, the poison was absorbed through their skin. The substance is designed to penetrate rapidly through dermal contact, enter the bloodstream, and cause rapid neurological effects. Exactly the symptoms the victims exhibited. But wouldn't that make the letter dangerous to everyone who handled it? I asked. The postal workers who sorted it, Mr. Morrison who delivered it, the household servants who might have touched it before the victim. That's the diabolical cleverness of this method, Holmes said grimly. The poison requires extended contact to absorb through skin in fatal doses. Brief handling, the seconds or minutes that postal workers touch letters during sorting and delivery, wouldn't provide sufficient exposure to cause serious poisoning. But when the victim opens the envelope, removes the letter, reads it, and continues handling the poisoned paper for several minutes while processing the threatening message, they receive a fatal dose. It's a timing mechanism built into the murder method itself. Postal workers survive because they handle mail, briefly, but the intended victim dies because they handle the letter long enough to absorb lethal quantities of poison. This was among the most sophisticated and terrifying murder methods I'd encountered in my years with Holmes. The killer had weaponized the postal system itself, turning ordinary letters into delivery vehicles for untraceable poison, and had done so in a way that minimized risk to innocent postal workers, while ensuring the intended victims received fatal doses. We're dealing with someone possessing advanced knowledge of chemistry and toxicology, Holmes continued, examining the other two letters with equal caution and finding identical preparation. Someone who understands poison absorption rates through skin, who knows how to incorporate toxins into paper, and who has access to or can manufacture dangerous organophosphate compounds. This isn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It's calculated, premeditated murder using sophisticated scientific methods. The question is, who are the targets and why? I asked. Are these random victims, or is there a connection between Lord Pemberton, Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Whitmore that explains why they were specifically murdered? That's what we must determine, Holmes agreed. But first, we need to secure these poisoned letters safely, develop methods for detecting similar letters in the mail stream, and warn potential future victims if we can identify a pattern. Then we can focus on identifying the killer. Holmes carefully sealed the examined letters in separate glass containers with airtight seals, ensuring no one else would be exposed to the poison. He then called Hartwell and Morrison back into the room and explained what he had discovered: the contact poison incorporated into the paper, the mechanism of absorption through extended handling, and the sophisticated nature of the murder method. "This is worse than I feared," Hartwell said, his face pale. "If someone can send poison letters through the mail that kill whoever handles them, the entire postal system becomes a potential murder weapon. How do we detect these letters before they reach their victims? We handle millions of pieces of mail. We can't chemically test every letter for poison." "No, but we can look for patterns," Holmes replied. All 3 poisoned letters were posted from the same Whitechapel letterbox. If the killer continues using that posting location, we can focus surveillance and testing on mail originating there. Additionally, we can examine the handwriting on the addresses and look for similar letters in the mail stream. The killer must post the letters somewhere. If we can identify and intercept them before delivery, we can prevent future murders. "But what about letters already in the system?" Morrison asked anxiously. "What if more poisoned letters have been posted and are being sorted right now, waiting to be delivered tomorrow or the next day? People could die before we can warn them." "That's why we must move immediately," Holmes said. "Mr. Hartwell, I need the Postal Service to implement emergency measures. First, all mail posted from the Whitechapel letterbox where the poisoned letters originated should be quarantined and examined before delivery. Second, any letters with handwriting similar to the poisoned letters should be set aside for chemical testing. Third, we need to identify other potential victims and warn them not to handle mail with their bare hands until the killer is captured." "But how do we identify potential victims without knowing the killer's motive or selection criteria?" Hartwell protested. "By examining the victim's connections and looking for patterns," Holmes explained. Lord Pemberton, Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Whitmore, 3 prominent Londoners from similar social classes who died from identical poisoned letters. There must be a connection, some shared factor that explains why they were targeted. Dr. Watson and I will investigate their backgrounds, their business dealings, their social connections, and their pasts to identify the common thread. Once we understand why these 3 were murdered, we can predict who might be next and potentially identify the killer. Over the following days, Holmes conducted one of the most intensive investigations of his career, racing against time to prevent more poisoned letters from reaching their intended victims, while also tracking down the murderer responsible for this terrifying crime. I accompanied him as we pursued multiple lines of inquiry simultaneously, knowing that every hour's delay might cost another life. We began by researching the 3 victims in detail, looking for connections that explained why they, specifically, had been targeted for murder. Lord Edmund Pemberton had been an industrialist who built his fortune in textile manufacturing, served in the House of Lords, and was known for aggressive business practices that had reportedly ruined several competitors. Mrs. Sarah Blackwood had been a widow who inherited substantial wealth from her late husband, a shipping magnate, and had used that fortune to support various artistic and charitable causes, while also managing the shipping business after her husband's death. Mr. Thomas Whitmore had been a private banker who advised wealthy clients on investments and financial management, known for discretion and for helping clients maximize profits through sophisticated financial instruments. 3 wealthy, prominent people from the same social class, Holmes observed after reviewing the basic biographical information. But what specifically connects them? Shared business dealings, personal relationships, a common enemy who would want all 3 dead. We interviewed family members, business associates, and friends of each victim, asking about their activities in the weeks before their deaths, whether they had received threats, whether they had enemies who might want them dead. Most people we spoke with were shocked by the murders and couldn't imagine who would want to kill the victims. But one conversation proved illuminating. We spoke with Lord Pemberton's solicitor, who mentioned that Pemberton had recently been involved in a controversial business matter, the closure of a textile mill in Manchester that put hundreds of workers out of employment. Lord Pemberton made the decision based purely on business logic. The mill was unprofitable, and closing it made financial sense, the solicitor explained. But it was devastating for the workers and their community. There were protests, angry letters sent to Lord Pemberton, even some threats. He received police protection for a few weeks after the closure, but eventually the matter died down and life returned to normal. Similarly, Mrs. Blackwood had faced controversy related to her late husband's shipping business. We learned from her business manager that several months before her death, a cargo ship owned by her company had sunk in a storm, resulting in the deaths of 12 crew members. An inquiry had concluded the ship was adequately maintained, and the sinking was due to extraordinary weather conditions. But families of the dead sailors had blamed Mrs. Blackwood personally, claiming she had prioritized profits over safety by undermining crew and maintenance budgets. Mr. Whitmore, the banker, had been connected to a financial scandal. One of his wealthy clients had made high-risk investments based on Whitmore's advice and had lost nearly everything when those investments failed. The client had committed suicide after being bankrupted, and his family had blamed Whitmore for providing reckless financial guidance and for not adequately warning about the risks involved. 3 victims, 3 controversies involving working-class people harmed by the victim's decisions or advice, Holmes said, seeing the pattern emerge. The textile mill closure that put hundreds out of work, the ship sinking that killed 12 sailors, the financial advice that led to bankruptcy and suicide. In each case, ordinary working people suffered tragedy because of decisions made by wealthy, powerful individuals who faced no legal consequences for those decisions. You think the poisoner is someone seeking revenge for one of these controversies? I asked. Not revenge for one of them, revenge for all of them, Holmes replied. Look at the pattern. The poisoner targets multiple wealthy individuals, sends them threatening messages about judgment and justice, uses a sophisticated poison that requires scientific knowledge to create. This isn't simple revenge by one aggrieved party, but a broader campaign of vigilante justice against what the killer views as a callous upper class that harms working people with impunity. So the killer could strike again, targeting any wealthy person perceived as having harmed workers or ordinary people. Precisely, which means dozens or even hundreds of potential targets in London alone. We must identify the killer quickly, or the death toll will continue rising. Holmes focused his investigation on finding someone connected to all 3 controversies. Someone who lost their job in Lord Pemberton's mill closure, or lost a family member in Mrs. Blackwood's ship sinking, or was harmed by Mr. Whitmore's financial advice. Such a person might have motivation to target all 3 victims as part of a broader revenge campaign. He also investigated who would have the chemical knowledge necessary to create the poison and the sophistication to incorporate it into paper. This method requires expertise beyond what a common criminal would possess, Holmes noted. We're looking for someone with education in chemistry,
Possibly someone who worked in chemical manufacturing or pharmaceuticals, who has access to organophosphate compounds or the means to synthesize them. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While investigating the families of the sailors who had died in Mrs. Bagwood's ship sinking, Holmes learned about a man named Dr. Marcus Hartwell, no relation to the postal inspector, who had been a ship's physician on vessels in Mrs. Blackwood's fleet. Dr. Hartwell's brother had been among the sailors who died in the sinking. The brother's death had devastated Dr. Hartwell, and he had publicly accused Mrs. Blackwood of prioritizing profits over safety. Further investigation revealed that Dr. Hartwell had connections to the other two victims as well. He had grown up in Manchester, where his father had worked in Lord Pemberton's textile mill, a mill that was among those Pemberton had closed, resulting in Dr. Hartwell's father losing his job and dying in poverty shortly afterward. And Dr. Hartwell's late wife had been the daughter of the man who committed suicide after losing his fortune on investments recommended by Mr. Whitmore. Her father's death and the family's financial ruin had contributed to her own death from illness shortly afterward, as they could no longer afford proper medical care. Dr. Marcus Hartwell lost his father to Lord Pemberton's mill closure, lost his wife's father and then his wife to Mr. Whitmore's financial advice, and lost his brother to Mrs. Blackwood's ship sinking. Holmes explained after assembling this information. 3 tragedies, 3 victims the killer held personally responsible, and a doctor's training that would provide the chemical knowledge needed to create sophisticated poisons. He's our man. We investigated Dr. Hartwell's current location and activities. He had left his position as ship's physician 2 years earlier, shortly after his brother's death, and had established a small medical practice in Whitechapel, exactly the district from which the poisoned letters had been posted. Holmes obtained a warrant to search Dr. Hartwell's residence and medical office, looking for evidence of poison preparation and letter construction. The search proved devastatingly conclusive. In Dr. Hartwell's medical office, hidden in a locked cabinet, Holmes found containers of organophosphate compounds labelled for agricultural use, but clearly refined for more concentrated toxicity. Paper treated with poison, ready to be made into lethal letters. A list of names with notations beside each: Lord Pemberton, Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Whitmore were marked as judged, while 5 other names appeared unmarked, indicating future targets. Drafts of the threatening messages sent with the poisoned letters, detailed notes about poison absorption rates through skin, and calculations about optimal dosing for fatal effect. Most chillingly, there was a journal in which Dr. Hartwell had recorded his philosophy and justifications for his campaign of murder. I have spent years watching the wealthy destroy ordinary lives with impunity. They close factories, putting hundreds out of work. They cut corners on safety, causing deaths. They give reckless financial advice, destroying families, and they face no consequences. The law protects them because they have money and power. Someone must hold them accountable. Someone must deliver justice when the legal system fails. I have become that instrument of justice. The poison letters are perfect, untraceable, delivered through the ordinary mail, requiring sophisticated knowledge that points to no one. The victims handle their letters, absorb the poison,
and die knowing they've been judged for their sins. It's appropriate that their deaths come through something as ordinary as their morning post. They destroyed ordinary lives with their callous decisions, so ordinary letters become the instruments of their judgment. With this evidence secured, Holmes and Inspector Lestrade arrested Dr. Marcus Hartwell at his medical practice. The doctor did not resist or deny his crimes. Instead, he spoke with calm conviction about his motives and methods. "I don't regret what I've done," Dr. Hartwell stated during his interrogation. "Those 3 people destroyed my family through their callous decisions and faced no legal consequences. Lord Pemberton closed mills putting thousands out of work, including my father who died in poverty. Mr. Whitmore gave reckless financial advice that led to my father-in-law's suicide and my wife's death from illness we couldn't afford to treat. Mrs. Blackwood's profit-driven corner-cutting on ship maintenance killed my brother and 11 other men. They were never held accountable. They were too wealthy and powerful. Someone had to deliver justice. So you decided to become judge, jury, and executioner," Holmes said coldly, "using your medical knowledge to create sophisticated poisons, weaponizing the postal system to deliver death, and murdering people you judged guilty without trial or due process. They had their trials, inquiries that absolved them, legal proceedings that found no criminal liability. The system protects the wealthy and blames the poor for their own suffering. I simply provided the justice the legal system refused to deliver." "And the 5 other names on your list?" Inspector Lestrade asked. "Were you planning to murder them as well?" "They're all guilty of similar crimes against ordinary people," Dr. Hartwell said without remorse. "A factory owner whose unsafe conditions killed workers, a landlord who evicted families into winter streets, a banker who foreclosed on homes during a financial crisis. They all deserve judgment. I was working on preparing letters for them when you arrested me." The trial of Dr. Marcus Hartwell attracted enormous public attention and sparked fierce debate about class, justice, and vigilante action. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the poisoned materials found in his possession, his written journal detailing his crimes and philosophy, testimony from chemical experts confirming that his poison formulations matched those used in the letters, and his own confession. The defense attempted to argue that Dr. Hartwell's mental state was impaired by grief over his family tragedies, that he was suffering from a form of traumatic insanity that made him not fully responsible for his actions. They presented psychiatrists who testified that the cumulative trauma of losing his father, father-in-law, wife, and brother to events he perceived as caused by wealthy people's callous decisions had created an obsessive need for revenge that overwhelmed his rational judgment. But the prosecution countered that Dr. Hartwell's crimes demonstrated careful planning, sophisticated execution, and rational calculation rather than insane compulsion. The defendant meticulously prepared poisons, carefully selected victims, methodically created and mailed lethal letters, and documented his actions with clear awareness of their criminality, the prosecutor argued. This is not insanity, but coldly calculated murder disguised as justice. The trial also became a forum for broader debates about social inequality and the accountability of the wealthy. Some public voices expressed sympathy for Dr. Hartwell's motives, if not his methods, arguing that he had identified real injustices: mill closures, devastating communities, safety corners cutting, causing deaths, reckless financial advice destroying families. that the legal system had failed to address adequately. Dr. Hartwell's crimes are inexcusable, but his grievances are real. One newspaper editorial noted, "The wealthy do make decisions that harm working people and do often escape consequences that poorer people would face for similar actions. While murder is never justified, this case highlights the need for greater accountability for those whose economic power gives them the ability to destroy lives without legal liability." Others condemned any sympathy for Dr. Hartwell as dangerous moral relativism. Murder is murder, regardless of motive, another editorial countered. Dr. Hartwell appointed himself judge and executioner, deciding who deserved to die based solely on his own assessment of their guilt. This is the antithesis of law and justice. If we excuse or minimize his crimes because we sympathize with his grievances, we invite vigilante violence and the breakdown of legal order. The jury convicted Dr. Hartwell on all charges: 3 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted murder for the future targets on his list, and various charges related to the illegal possession and use of toxic substances. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging, with remarks emphasizing that personal tragedy did not justify vigilante murder. Dr. Marcus Hartwell, you suffered genuine tragedies, caused partly by the callous decisions of wealthy individuals. Those tragedies were real, and your grievances have some foundation. But you responded to perceived injustice with murder, with calculated, premeditated killings of people you judged guilty without any legal process or right of defense. You turned the postal system into a weapon, endangering not just your intended victims, but potentially thousands of innocent people who might have handled your poisoned letters. Your sophisticated murder method made you particularly dangerous, as it could be copied by others, and could have created widespread panic and terror. This court sentences you to death, both as punishment for your crimes and as deterrent to others who might consider vigilante violence as a response to perceived injustice. The sentence was carried out 3 months later. Dr. Hartwell went to his death, maintaining that his actions had been justified, that he had delivered justice where the legal system had failed, and that he had no regrets about his campaign against what he viewed as a callous upper class. For the Postal Service and the broader public, the case created lasting anxiety about mail safety. Even after Dr. Hartwell's execution, people remained fearful of opening their post, worried that more poisoned letters might be in circulation, or that someone might copy his methods. The Postal Service implemented new security measures, monitoring of mail from locations where suspicious letters had been posted, random testing of letters for chemical contamination, and public education about handling mail safely. The Hartwell case damaged public confidence in the postal system for years. Inspector Hartwell, the postal inspector, reflected after the case concluded. People were afraid to open their morning post, worried that any letter might be poisoned. We had to rebuild trust through transparency, enhanced security measures, and demonstrating that we were taking the threat seriously. The psychological impact of Hartwell's crimes extended far beyond his actual victims to create widespread fear, affecting millions of people. For Holmes, the case represented one of his most urgent and consequential investigations. He had identified a sophisticated murder method, prevented additional killings by intercepting future poisoned letters, and captured a dangerous criminal before more people died. But he also recognized the social issues the case highlighted. Dr. Hartwell was a murderer who deserved punishment, Holmes reflected after the execution. But he was also correct that the wealthy sometimes harm ordinary people and escape legal accountability. Lord Pemberton did close mills, devastating communities. Mrs. Blackwood's company did cut costs in ways that contributed to sailor deaths. Mr. Whitmore did give financial advice that ruined people. These actions weren't crimes under law, but they caused real harm. Hartwell's response, murder, was wrong and inexcusable. But the underlying grievances he identified were legitimate. Society must find ways to hold the powerful accountable for harms they cause, or we invite the kind of vigilante violence Hartwell represented. The case influenced subsequent discussions about corporate accountability, workplace safety, financial regulation, and the responsibilities of those whose economic power gives them ability to make decisions affecting many lives. Parliamentary investigations were launched into the specific incidents Hartwell had referenced: Lord Pemberton's mill closures, the ship sinking, the financial advice scandal, examining whether existing laws and regulations adequately protected ordinary people from harms caused by wealthy individuals' decisions. The Hartwell case exposed gaps in how Britain holds the economically powerful accountable, a parliamentary report noted. Current laws focus on individual criminal acts, but provide inadequate remedy for harms caused by corporate decisions, management choices, or financial advice that devastates ordinary people, while enriching or benefiting those who made the decisions. While vigilante violence cannot be tolerated, we must develop better legal frameworks for accountability, ensuring that those with power affect many lives bear appropriate responsibility for consequences of their actions. For the families of Dr. Hartwell's victims, the resolution brought complex feelings rather than simple closure. They mourned their dead relatives, appreciated that the killer had been caught and punished, but also struggled with the public debate about whether the victims had deserved their fates because of their past actions. My husband made difficult business decisions based on economic reality, Lord Pemberton's widow said in a public statement. Closing unprofitable mills was painful, but necessary. He didn't deserve to be murdered for making those decisions. Dr. Hartwell turned personal tragedies into justification for killing people he deemed guilty without any legal process. That's not justice, it's terrorism. The case remained in criminal justice literature as an example of how sophisticated criminal methods requiring specialized knowledge could be used for murder, and how even systems as secure as the Postal Service could be, weaponized by creative and knowledgeable criminals. Law enforcement agencies studied Hartwell's poison letter method, developing detection techniques and security protocols to prevent similar attacks. The Hartwell case demonstrated that murder methods evolve as science advances, a criminology text noted. Hartwell used his medical training and chemical knowledge to create a nearly undetectable poison delivery system that weaponized the Postal Service itself. This required sophistication far beyond typical criminal capabilities. As science continues advancing, law enforcement must anticipate that future criminals with specialized knowledge will find new ways to exploit technology and social systems for harmful purposes. Years after the case, I attended a lecture on forensic toxicology, where the speaker used Dr. Hartwell's poison letters as a teaching example. The lecturer displayed photographs of the letters safely reproduced without actual transfer poison, and explained the scientific principles behind the murder method, how organophosphate compounds absorbed through skin, how they disrupted nervous system function, causing the symptoms the victims experienced, and how incorporating the poison into paper created a delivery mechanism that was difficult to detect and deadly to those who handled the letters for extended periods. The Hartwell case represents sophisticated understanding of toxicology, pharmacology, and poison delivery mechanisms, the lecturer explained. The killer knew that brief handling wouldn't cause fatal poisoning, allowing postal workers to survive, but that extended handling by the victim while reading the letter would deliver a fatal dose. This required calculations about absorption rates, dosing, and timing that most criminals wouldn't possess. It demonstrates how medical or scientific training can be corrupted for criminal purposes. The lecture prompted discussions among the medical and toxicology students about professional ethics and the responsibilities that came with specialized knowledge. We have knowledge that could be misused for harmful purposes, one student observed. How do we ensure that our training serves healing rather than harm? Through commitment to ethical principles and recognition that knowledge carries responsibility, the lecturer responded. Dr. Hartwell possessed the knowledge to save lives, but chose to use it for murder. That choice violated every principle of medical ethics. The lesson is not that specialized knowledge is dangerous, but that those who possess it must remain committed to using it for good, rather than allowing personal grievances or ideological convictions to corrupt professional ethics. Holmes occasionally referenced the Hartwell case in conversations about criminal psychology and the relationship between personal tragedy and criminal behavior. Hartwell experienced genuine tragedies, losing multiple family members to events he perceived as caused by wealthy people's callous decisions, Holmes reflected. Those tragedies were real, and the pain they caused was legitimate. But millions of people experience personal tragedies without becoming murderers. What distinguished Hartwell was his decision to transform grief into ideology, to reframe his personal losses as systemic injustice requiring violent correction. He didn't just want revenge against specific individuals. He wanted to punish an entire class of people he viewed as collectively guilty. That transformation from grieving individual to ideological vigilante is what made him so dangerous. Yet many people sympathized with his motives, even while condemning his methods, I observed. The trial revealed genuine support for the idea that the wealthy needed to be held more accountable. And that sympathy is itself dangerous, Holmes replied. Once we begin excusing murder because we agree with the killer's grievances, we've abandoned the principle that violence is wrong regardless of motive. Hartwell's targets may have made decisions that harmed people, but they didn't violate laws. Hartwell appointed himself judge and executioner, deciding who deserved to die based solely on his own assessment. If we allow that, if we say murder is justified when the victim deserved it, then we invite endless cycles of vigilante violence, where everyone who feels wronged believes they have the right to kill those they blame. The case had lasting impact on Daniel Morrison, the postal carrier who had unknowingly delivered the poisoned letters. Despite Holmes's assurances that he bore no responsibility for the deaths, Morrison struggled with guilt and trauma from his unwitting role in 3 murders. I keep thinking about walking up to those doors, putting those letters through the letterboxes, and walking away, not knowing I'd just delivered death, Morrison told me during a conversation months after the case. Lord Pemberton, Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Whitmore, they received their morning post just like thousands of other people, opened their letters expecting ordinary correspondence, and died within hours because of what I delivered. Intellectually, I know I'm not responsible, but emotionally, I feel like I participated in murder. Morrison eventually left his position as postal carrier, unable to continue the work that had become associated with such trauma. The Postal Service provided compensation and helped him transition to different employment, office work managing mail sorting operations rather than delivering letters directly. But he never fully recovered from the psychological impact of being the delivery mechanism for Dr. Hartwell's murders. The Hartwell case created many victims beyond those who died from the poisoned letters. I wrote in my case notes, Daniel Morrison's life was permanently altered by his unwitting role in delivering death. Thousands of people lived in fear of opening their mail for months after the case became public. Families of the victims struggled with public debate about whether their loved ones deserved to die. And society itself faced difficult questions about class, justice, and accountability that the case highlighted but didn't resolve. The Royal Mail implemented lasting changes inspired by the case. New security protocols included random testing of mail for chemical contamination, enhanced surveillance of posting locations where suspicious letters originated, and procedures for quarantining mail when credible threats were received. The service also developed public education campaigns about handling mail safely, using gloves when opening suspicious letters, washing hands after handling mail, reporting letters with unusual characteristics to authorities. The Hartwell case forced us to confront vulnerabilities in the postal system we had never seriously considered. The postal inspector Geoffrey Hartwell reflected in a memoir he published years later. We had security measures against theft, fraud, and improper use of the mail, but we had never anticipated that someone would weaponize letters themselves, turning ordinary mail into delivery vehicles for poison. The case taught us that any system can be exploited by sufficiently knowledgeable and motivated criminals, and that we must continually evaluate and update security measures to address emerging threats. The case also influenced medical and scientific training, particularly regarding ethical responsibilities of those with specialized knowledge. Medical schools and chemistry programs began incorporating more extensive ethics education, emphasizing that knowledge could be misused and that professionals had responsibilities to ensure their expertise served beneficial rather than harmful purposes. The Hartwell case is taught in our medical ethics curriculum as an example of how professional knowledge can be corrupted, one medical school dean explained. Dr. Hartwell had training that should have been used to heal, but he chose to use it for murder. We teach students that possessing specialized knowledge creates ethical obligations, that they must commit to using their skills to benefit rather than harm, and that personal grievances or ideological convictions cannot justify violating professional ethics. For the 5 individuals whose names had appeared on Dr. Hartwell's list of future targets, the case was a terrifying brush with death they had never known they faced until after Hartwell's arrest. Holmes personally contacted each to inform them they had been targeted and to explain how the investigation had prevented their murders. One of these individuals, a factory owner named Robert Chambers, met with Holmes to thank him for preventing what would have been his murder. I had no idea Dr. Hartwell even knew who I was, much less that he viewed me as deserving death, Chambers said, visibly shaken. Yes, there was an accident at my factory several years ago where workers died. It was investigated and we were found to have adequate safety measures. But apparently, Hartwell believed I was guilty of criminal negligence and deserved to be murdered. The realization that I was days or weeks away from receiving a poison letter,
that I could have opened my morning post and died within hours. It's profoundly disturbing. Chambers became an advocate for improved workplace safety following the case, implementing enhanced safety measures at his factories that exceeded legal requirements, and speaking publicly about corporate responsibility for worker welfare. The Hartwell case forced me to confront how my decisions affect workers' lives, Chambers explained. While I didn't deserve to be murdered, Hartwell's targeting of me reflected legitimate concerns about workplace safety. I can honor the workers who died in my factory by ensuring such accidents never happen again, by treating safety as a moral imperative rather than just a legal requirement. This response, using the trauma of being targeted for murder as motivation for positive change, represented perhaps the most constructive outcome of the terrible case. Several other individuals on Hartwell's target list responded similarly, re-examining their business practices and implementing changes that better protected workers and vulnerable people affected by their decisions. Holmes observed these developments with cautious approval. Hartwell's motives were criminal and wrong, Holmes said. But if his targets or potential targets use the experience to become more conscientious about how their decisions affect others, then something positive emerges from tragedy. The ultimate refutation of Hartwell's vigilante ideology isn't just his execution, but demonstrating that change can occur through legal and ethical means rather than requiring violence. The case remained in Holmes's files as one of his most scientifically complex investigations, requiring not just detective skills, but deep understanding of toxicology, poison delivery mechanisms, and chemical analysis. Holmes continued to study developments in forensic toxicology following the case, recognizing that future criminals with scientific knowledge might attempt similar innovations in murder methods. Hartwell's poison letter method was nearly perfect from a criminal perspective, Holmes wrote in a monograph about detection of contact poisons. The poison was difficult to detect without specific chemical tests. The delivery mechanism minimized risk to the killer while ensuring victim exposure, and the use of the postal system created both physical and psychological distance between murderer and victims. Only the pattern connecting multiple deaths and the postal system's internal tracking allowed us to identify Hartwell before he completed his planned series of murders. Future criminals might learn from his mistakes, using different posting locations for each letter, targeting victims with less obvious connections, or developing even more sophisticated poisons that are harder to detect. This analysis prompted law enforcement agencies to develop better systems for detecting patterns across multiple deaths that might otherwise appear unconnected. The Hartwell Protocol, as it became known, involved tracking unusual deaths and comparing their characteristics, circumstances, and timing to identify potential serial murders or systematic poisoning campaigns that might not be immediately obvious. The Hartwell case taught us to look for patterns, Inspector Lestrade explained during a police training session. 3 victims dying from similar symptoms within 6 weeks should have triggered investigation earlier than it did. If we had identified the pattern after the second death instead of the third, we might have prevented Mr. Whitmore's murder. Now we have systematic procedures for comparing unusual deaths and flagging potential patterns that warrant investigation. Years after the case, a young journalist named Margaret Fletcher, no relation to Thomas Fletcher, the postal carrier, contacted Holmes while researching an article about unsolved crimes and criminal methods. She was particularly interested in the Hartwell case and asked Holmes whether he thought the poison letter method might be copied by future criminals. "The method is public knowledge now," Holmes acknowledged.
The trial included detailed testimony about how Hartwell prepared his poisons and incorporated them into paper. Anyone with chemistry knowledge and access to the right materials could potentially replicate the method. That's a disturbing reality, that a sophisticated murder technique, once revealed, becomes available to any criminal willing to study and implement it. So could there be more poison letter murders in the future? Fletcher asked. Possibly, Holmes said, though several factors work against widespread adoption of the method. First, it requires specialized knowledge that most criminals don't possess. Understanding of toxicology, access to dangerous chemicals, skill in preparing stable poison formulations. Second, law enforcement and postal services now watch for such attacks. Mail from suspicious sources is monitored. Chemical testing capabilities have improved, and patterns would be identified more quickly than they were with Hartwell. Third, the method carries significant risk for the perpetrator. Preparing poisons exposes the killer to the same toxins that kill victims, and the materials required are now tracked by authorities. But, Holmes continued more grimly, a determined criminal with appropriate knowledge and resources could certainly attempt similar attacks. The Hartwell case demonstrated that sophisticated murder methods can be nearly undetectable if carefully executed. Preventing future poison letter attacks requires vigilance from both postal authorities and the public, combined with rapid response when suspicious patterns emerge. Fletcher's article, titled "The Murder Method That Changed How We View Mail," was published in a major London newspaper and rekindled public discussion about the case. The article detailed Hartwell's sophisticated poison preparation, his methodical selection of victims, and the investigation that ultimately exposed his crimes. But it also explored the lasting impact, the permanent changes to postal security, the ongoing anxiety some people felt about opening mail, and the unresolved questions about class, justice, and accountability that the case had highlighted. The Hartwell case remains relevant years after his execution because the issues it raised haven't been fully resolved, Fletcher wrote. We still grapple with questions about how to hold the powerful accountable when their decisions harm ordinary people but don't violate laws. We still worry about sophisticated criminals using scientific knowledge for murder. And we still feel some anxiety when opening unexpected mail, remembering that ordinary letters once became instruments of death. The case changed how we think about mail, about justice, and about the responsibilities that come with power and knowledge. Holmes kept a copy of Fletcher's article in his files, noting that it represented a thoughtful analysis of the case's lasting implications. He occasionally used the article when discussing the case with others, appreciating how Fletcher had captured both the investigative details and the broader social context. For me, the case remained one of the most terrifying investigations of my career with Holmes. The victims had died simply by opening their morning mail, an act so ordinary and routine that no one would imagine it could be deadly. The sophistication of Hartwell's method, the difficulty of detecting the poison, and the vulnerability of the postal system to such attacks all contributed to a sense that anyone could become a victim of invisible, untraceable murder. The Hartwell case illustrated how science can be corrupted for criminal purposes, I wrote in my case notes. Dr. Hartwell had medical training that should have enabled him to save lives, but he used that knowledge to develop sophisticated poisons and delivery methods that killed his victims in ways that were difficult to detect or prevent. His crimes demonstrated that specialized knowledge creates both capabilities and responsibilities, that those who possess such knowledge must remain committed to using it ethically, and that society must develop safeguards against the misuse of scientific expertise. The case also reinforced my appreciation for Holmes's diverse knowledge and his ability to apply scientific analysis to criminal investigation. His understanding of toxicology, his careful chemical testing of the poisoned letters, and his ability to identify patterns connecting the deaths had been essential to solving the case and preventing additional murders. Without Holmes's expertise, more people would have died from Hartwell's poisoned letters, I reflected. The police initially dismissed the deaths as unconnected medical emergencies. The Postal Service might never have identified the pattern linking the victims. Hartwell could have continued his campaign, murdering the 5 remaining people on his target list and potentially expanding to new victims. Holmes's investigation saved lives by identifying the threat quickly and exposing the killer before he completed his planned murders. Holmes characteristically deflected such praise. The case was solved through systematic investigation and scientific analysis, he said when I expressed these thoughts. Any competent detective with adequate knowledge of toxicology could have done the same. The key was recognizing that multiple similar deaths occurring in close temporal proximity warranted investigation for possible connections, then following the evidence methodically until patterns emerged. But most detectives wouldn't have the toxicology knowledge to identify the poison or understand the delivery mechanism, I countered. Then they should acquire such knowledge or consult with experts who possess it, Holmes replied. Modern crime requires modern investigative capabilities. A detective who relies solely on traditional methods, witness interviews and physical evidence examination, will fail when confronted with scientifically sophisticated crimes. The Hartwell case demonstrates why detectives must continuously educate themselves about scientific advances and must build networks of specialist consultants who can provide expertise when needed. This philosophy, the detectives must evolve to address increasingly sophisticated criminal methods, became a recurring theme in Holmes's later work. He regularly attended scientific lectures, maintained correspondence with chemists and other specialists, and advocated for enhanced scientific training for police investigators. Criminal investigation must become more scientific if it's to remain effective, Holmes wrote in an article for a police journal. Criminals with scientific knowledge will exploit that knowledge for harmful purposes, developing murder methods and concealment techniques that traditional investigative approaches cannot detect or solve. Police forces must develop forensic capabilities, laboratories for analyzing evidence, trained specialists in chemistry and toxicology, systematic procedures for identifying patterns across multiple cases. The Hartwell case was solved through chemical analysis and pattern recognition. Future cases will require equally sophisticated approaches. The article influenced police training and department organization, with many forces establishing forensic units and hiring specialists with scientific backgrounds. The evolution of police work from primarily witness-based investigation to science-supported analysis owed much to cases like Hartwell's that demonstrated the necessity of such approaches. The legacy of the letterbox that delivered death extended far beyond the immediate case resolution. It changed how people viewed their mail, introducing permanent anxiety about the safety of ordinary correspondence. It prompted lasting reforms in postal security and mail handling procedures. It sparked debates about class, justice, and accountability that continued for decades. and it demonstrated how specialized knowledge could be weaponized, requiring society to develop better safeguards against the misuse of scientific expertise. The Hartwell case was a watershed moment in multiple domains, a historian of crime and criminal justice wrote decades later. It represented one of the first cases where sophisticated scientific knowledge was deliberately used to create a nearly undetectable murder method. It exposed vulnerabilities in the postal system that had never been seriously considered. It prompted debates about vigilante justice and class accountability that remain relevant today. And it demonstrated the evolution of detective work towards scientific analysis and systematic investigation. The case's influence extended far beyond the immediate crimes, affecting how we think about male security, how we investigate patterns of death, how we train forensic specialists, and how we balance sympathy for grievances with condemnation of violent responses. For Holmes, the case remained a reminder of both the power and the limitations of detective work. He had solved the mystery, prevented additional murders, and brought the killer to justice. But he couldn't undo the deaths that had already occurred, couldn't fully restore public confidence in male safety, and couldn't resolve the underlying social tensions that had motivated Hartwell's crimes. Detection solves crimes but doesn't prevent them, Holmes reflected during one of our last conversations about the case. I identified Hartwell and stopped his murder campaign, but 3 people were already dead. Better systems for monitoring unusual death patterns might have identified the threat earlier. Better social policies addressing wealth inequality and accountability might have prevented Hartwell's grievances from festering into murderous ideology. The ultimate solution to crime isn't better detection, but addressing the social conditions that create criminals. Yet detection remains necessary, I pointed out. Even if we address social conditions perfectly, some individuals will still commit crimes. We need both social reform and effective law enforcement. Agreed, Holmes said, but cases like Hartwell's remind us that punishment after the fact is inadequate. Prevention through addressing root causes is always preferable to solving crimes after victims are already dead. The letterbox delivered death because a man transformed personal tragedy into ideological violence, and neither the social safety nets that might have prevented his family's tragedies nor the detection systems that might have identified his threat sooner existed adequately. Both failures contributed to 3 unnecessary deaths. The case of the letterbox that delivered death closed with the killer executed, the murder method exposed, and enhanced security measures implemented to prevent similar attacks. But the questions it raised about justice, accountability, science, and security remained open, continuing to influence discussions about criminal justice, forensic science, and social policy for generations to come. The 3 victims, Lord Pemberton, Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Whitmore, were buried and mourned, their deaths becoming statistics in crime records and examples in detective training, rather than simply personal tragedies for their families. Dr. Marcus Hartwell was executed and buried in an unmarked grave, his sophisticated murder method becoming notorious, while his grievances and philosophy were largely forgotten or dismissed as rationalizations for inexcusable violence. And ordinary people continued opening their mail, most without fear, but some with lingering anxiety, remembering that once, not so long ago, the letterbox had delivered death, that the Morning Post bringing news from loved ones and business correspondence could also bring sophisticated poison designed to kill whoever handled it, transforming the most routine of daily activities into a potentially deadly gamble. The memory of those 3 deaths and the fear they created served as a permanent reminder that security is never absolute, that any system can be weaponized by sufficiently creative and knowledgeable criminals, and that the price of safety is eternal vigilance combined with both improved detection capabilities and efforts to address the social conditions that transform grieving individuals into ideological murderers. Thank you for watching this investigation of the letterbox that delivered death. If you enjoyed uncovering this terrifying case of poisoned letters and scientific murder with Sherlock Holmes, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next case. Give this video a like if you appreciate stories about forensic science and the darker applications of specialized knowledge, and share it with fellow mystery enthusiasts. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of this case and which Sherlock Holmes investigation you'd like us to explore next. Until our next investigation, this is Dr. Watson, signing off.